Good morning, Francis and Hilary, and thank you for doing this interview on women and Cornish traditional music. And very much the focus here today is about your good selves. So I wondered whether I could start with a question. What instruments do you play, and do you sing as well?
Okay. I play the clarinet. I play the ordinary B flat clarinet. I also have a C clarinet that I acquired in the last few years, and I also have a bass clarinet. And I also sing, a lot.
When did you start playing the clarinet?
I learned at school. There were three instruments I wanted to learn: the harp, the accordion, or the clarinet. And funnily enough, at schools, the only option was a clarinet. I had actually heard some klezmer music. I didn't even know what it was at the time when I was about 14, and just thought it was the best thing ever. Didn't know what traditional clarinet music could sound like, but that really inspired me. So I think I began to, but it's clear to me that it was always folk instruments that I had been interested in.
Thank you. What about you, Francis?
I play the fiddle and I do a bit of singing, especially when encouraged by Hilary to do so. And I started playing the violin at school. I pestered in order to have lessons because my teacher at secondary school was full, didn't have any slots. But eventually I had lessons and then stopped playing after a number of years, had a gap, and then began playing fiddle music after that, which I saw as like a completely different thing that I was fascinated by. Didn't have any upbringing in folk music at all. It was classical music at home.
So when did you both first meet and how?
Well, I remember seeing Francis at a session in the Countryman in Peace. It was and not really knowing who she was. I knew she was something to do connected with Ross Celtic somehow. That was it, really. And then we all ended up going to the Isle of Man. And we began to talk and discovered that we both liked talking rather a lot. But we actually ended up, we had to share a room, didn't we, Francis? She had to share with me, my partner, and my two boys, bless her. And at some point, my partner had to tell us to stop talking because he was trying to go to sleep, and we were still talking at 2 o'clock in the morning. So this was in Cornish, the Isle of Man Celtic Festival. So I'll let Francis say anything more.
I remember that Isle of Man very well because that was kind of the beginning of really working together. But a couple of years previous, we went to the Pan-Celtic Festival in Tralee in Ireland because Hilary was playing with her band Gwariorion. So I'd seen Hilary on stage quite a few times, these wild, dark-haired people with pipes and dancing madly. Right. And Hilary and Will Coleman and Joe Tagney and friends and children. And so I'd already seen Hilary perform. And then before we went to Tralee, I bumped into Hilary in Truro with her little baby Alfie in her backpack, and she was telling me that there was going to be a session because Neil Davey was coming home. It's very exciting, just for a visit. We were going to have a session and play Cornish tunes, and would I like to come? Because she knew that I played Cornish tunes with Ross Celtic. So that's probably one of the first times we had a chat, I think. Unusual to see Hilary in Truro. And then when we went to Tralee, it was the beginning of the Jack and Jenny band that we played in.
It was very much, because of Cornish music that we met. That was definitely the way it happened, I think.
You both started on the Cornish trad scene. What was it like? Paint a picture of what your experiences were like when you were first kind of getting into this idea that there was even such a thing.
Well, I mean, prior to meeting Francis, I'd heard about this band called Bagas, who were doing Cornish music, and this was quite exciting because an instrumental Cornish music as opposed to just singing songs, which I knew a lot about from Brenda because of Brenda Wootton and that. And so it was really my brother who really wanted to have a music band, and we kind of started. And at that point, I think the only other Cornish musicians that we knew of were playing for dancing groups like Bagas Celtic and Camcanuic. And we didn't know anybody who was just playing as an instrumental band. And so that felt really, I don't know, yeah, really different. Apart from Bucka, who had disbanded by then, I thought they were all like really old men. And then discovered, you know, like one of them was same age as me. And dear reader, I married him. But anyway, yeah, so I mean, the scene was tiny, really, and I guess there was these tunes that weren't being played. I mean, there were these tunes that were very much used for the dancing, the set dancing, and obviously though that was the kind of musician's repertoire. But there was we knew from how do we know? I don't know. I'm trying to remember. My brother and this guy called Matthew Spring did some research anyway, but also there, I think from Merv, we knew of some of these other tunes. Oh yeah, because of Bucka as well. That there was these other tunes that weren't being played at all. And funnily enough, they were kind of much more minor-y tunes. And the ones played for dancing were quite major. And interestingly, it's just the way it is that for a clarinet, the minor tunes fit much better than the major ones, and we just started to play those tunes. And when Francis and I first got together, I mean, these were, you know, obviously there was Sowena and Dalla, which was a really important date in our calendar, the one and only date when some Cornish, the few Cornish people would get together, and we would have a session, and it was really hard because the people who played for dancing had their repertoire and we had these other tunes, and it went so far as to one of Francis's friends, forgot the name, she said, are these Cornish tunes? Because I don't know any of them, you know, and we had this, you know, we couldn't communicate.
So you think, Francis,
Yeah.
what was it like in those earlier days of getting together to play Cornish music?
Well, unlike Hilary's background of having grown up with the music and her brother and everything, I was absolutely ignorant on folk music, well, except Swiss folk music. Anyway, everything sort of like it was a very life-changing time for me. Went to Sowena and Dalla in 1989. I joined Ross Celtic 6 weeks before, and I was told that if I could play 10 tunes by ear, I could play at Sowena and Dalla. I didn't know what Sowena and Dalla was, and I'd never played a tune by ear in my life, so I had this whole getting used to playing in this different way, and this whole folk music thing, and the Cornish identity thing, all these things I'd never come across despite being, you know, born in Cornwall. So my first Sowena and Dalla was just a complete like overload of the music, and discovering that there were these other Celtic places that had this music as well, and then also being really aware, like Hilary said, of these differences in Cornish music, that you had the Ross Celtic people were the people that I first learnt music from, so Rod Lyon playing his melodeon, Kit Davey, Llewellyn Ansell, people like that. Then there was Camcanuic that we didn't really like very much because they played things in different keys and there was something going on. And I had just started my first full-time job, which was full of politics, and I just didn't want any more. So I didn't really know why you can't just, you know, like the rules. I could go and play one Manx tune with some Manx people, but if I wanted to play with Camcanuic, they were playing in different keys, and you know, then they changed key, and then they were, I think they were better, to be honest, than we were at that point. We were not so good. We didn't have recordings, and anyway, but we were the only two groups. So in that year, we got invited to everything, and I was quite puzzled in a way because I was just learning so much about the whole sort of Celtic world, as it were. And how I fitted in, you know, and I just wanted to play, and I wanted to play the music properly. I wanted to learn how to be a folk musician and not sort of get it wrong. So I was very tentative because I didn't want to get things wrong, I think. And that was kind of my first year. We went to Lorient, we went to tons and tons of things because everything in the calendar, there were only two groups that could go to it. So, you know, that's kind of what I remember about that year, really.
What is Lorient?
Lorient is it's the biggest Celtic festival in Europe, and takes place in August, takes over this town in Brittany for 10 days, started as a bagpipe festival in the 70s, and every year there is a Cornish dance group and a some kind of band or choir, male voice choir, brass band that goes over. And apparently there's mysterious rotation of how the dance groups go. And so anyway, Ross Celtic went that year. Having navigated through the coordinator to actually get there. But yeah, I did go, which was fantastic to go, to be able to do all those things. I had no idea that was going to happen.
Heady early days then.
Yeah, it was. And I also taught French, so that meant anything to do with languages. I was really interested. So we went to Brittany, we went to Galicia, you know, we went all over the place.
What about the bands and the groups you've both been part of? Can you say a bit about the ones you've been in separately, the ones you've been in together?
So, as I said, I sort of began to play music with my brother, and we formed a group called Lorient, Player People. And our whole idea, because we come from a theatre background as well, we kind of decided we wanted to do street music and theatre. So we went busking one summer, late 80s, and we went busking all in the summer around all the towns in Cornwall, and we had a little we played music, but we had little stories like the resurrection of the giant and things like that. So we sort of told stories, and we wanted to be like a travelling gypsies, I suppose. I don't know, for want of a better word. Will had an old ambulance, and we all piled into that and went round Cornwall and busked. And then we from then we developed into playing, and we started going to some of the other Celtic festivals, and we went to one on the Isle of Islay, which it was just fantastic. It was so amazing. I was pregnant by then, and Joe had children, and we would all sort of fall out of this van with all these children, and we didn't realise that, you know, people looked at us kind of like there was Will, my brother, me, Joe, his partner, and Liz, who played with us. So there was this one man, 3 women, and loads of children. I think they all thought he was like married to all of us. And I just remember some mad things, like we went to the first year in Cronacht. We were like living on just like on hardly any money, and we got there and we just discovered, we thought we were being put up for the whole time, but we just discovered it was bed and breakfast only. So we had no money to buy food, but we had just recently made our tapes, our Lorient tapes, and so we sold them, and that gave us enough money to buy food. So it was really, like, it was all a bit mad. And after then, what happened was when Will and Joe split up, we ended up carrying on, me, Joe, and Liz, as a woman group, 3 women, and that was a wonderful kind of time. We sort of really found our feet in a way. Will was playing bagpipes, as you can imagine. It was very loud, and I was accompanying him. And what I had to do was kind of step up. When he left, it was like I had to really get better, and that it was a really good learning curve in a way to improve what we were playing. I remember when we decided, we suddenly realised that there were all these feast tunes, like the furry tunes, and I remember we put this set together. We'd put St. Kevin Feast. I can't remember which were the ones we did put together. I mean, probably Helston. I mean, things like Tregidor and Furry weren't written by then, so I wasn't involved. Oh, Bobbin Riding, yeah, that was one. So anyway, so we started to get this idea that there were types of tunes, but we hadn't really catalogued them or anything. It was just this great wash of broad thing, and then Merv called the first what we call Tune Swap Day, where we got all these, you know, he got people together and began to think about creating Raka. And then we all just threw loads of tunes into Raka, and it was just this hot, as I say, it was just a miscellaneous mishmash. Anyway, that was Lorient still, that's right. And then what happened then was, as Frances said, I just missed completely us going to Tralee. And Liz, our 3rd member of the band, has suddenly announced she could only go for part of it.
What did Liz play in your band?
She played the accordion. Yeah. Anyway, so suddenly Joe and I were kind of took up the accordion, especially to play with Lorient. But anyway, she only came to part of the festival, so we were a bit high and dry. They told us we had all these other gigs, which we didn't realise, and so we had to ask all these other musicians, and that Francis was one of them. And we all got together, and it was a really funny time. We were playing the most bonkers tune sets, some with Irish in them as well, because like we just didn't know anything. Yeah, Breton, that was right. Yeah, and so when we got home, because we'd had a really good time, we'd said, well, Gwariorian's no longer, shall we get together? And Simon Lockley, I think it was him who instigated us, and we were called Captain Kerno and the Jack and Jenny Band, which I think is a great name. I think that was the beginning of something very exciting, I think, when Simon kind of could see the potential. Like Simon and Karen talked about the vision.
Yeah, so as Hilary said, it was this sort of opportunity with, as happens with bands, one band not carrying on, and then being invited to be in a band by Hilary was just this amazing, exciting thing. I had a lot of music projects on the go at that point, and Hilary was walking through Tralee at the Pan Celtic Festival with her pushchair, with child, with clarinet kind of on over the handle of the pushchair, and said to me, "Would you like to be in a band? How many bands are you in? And would you like to be in a band?" I said, "Of course, yes, I want to be in this band." Because I got to Tralee because somebody who was in Ross Celtic was also in Karen Brown's youth dance group, Ottenai Moors, and they had some musicians, including Simon Lockley, Karen Brown's husband at the time, and Robin Holmes, who wrote Gelasma, and Alan Pengelly. They were playing anyway, so they were like the nucleus of Karen's dance group, who was entering into the Tralee traditional dance part of the competition. And then Hilary was in the band bit with Gwariorion, so all those people kind of came together, and we did practice beforehand as well, because Karen had to raise money to get the youth group over. So we actually met and started playing music, and I knew absolutely nothing of what was going on, except I knew the tunes I knew with Ross Celtic, and I knew that the tunes that the young people danced to were pretty much the same. So when it came to the dance tunes, it was fabulous, because instead of playing in Ross Celtic, I was playing with these people who were definitely taking things to a new level. Simon's guitar playing, Alan's accordion. They kind of communicated not with words, but with sort of grunts as to what chord they were playing, and they would just play these fabulous arrangements of things. And then there was Hilary as well, and Robin, who could play a variety of instruments. So that was the sort of six of us with the Jack and Jenny band, but it didn't start with exactly six. It was kind of, as Hilary said, a sort of collective of people at the festival. And then when we came home, we started having all these rehearsals, and we did instant gigs, because my experience with local bands was it was hard to get gigs in the projects I've been involved in before. People didn't gig very often, and people sort of devised things in their front rooms, and months went by, they didn't play them out. But Hilary knew everybody in Cornwall, apparently. I think most of the people who did any kind of drama, she knew them, or was related to them, and had a huge string of gigs. And you rang all the people and said, "I don't have Gwariorion anymore, but I have this six-piece band called Jack and Jenny Band." And they all went, "Yeah, fine." So we were literally driving to gigs with Hilary and Joe, particularly the songs. I didn't know them at all. I didn't know the pub songs. I didn't know any harmonies. I didn't know any words. Hilary and Joe would be the other side of me in gigs, singing Hangan or the Spring Nightingale, kind of like willing me to pick the words up and the harmonies up, and then we would play the dance tunes that we already knew. And right away people were improvising, especially Hilary, and Robin quite a lot as well, and people playing different instruments. And yeah, it was the most exciting thing, because you could absolutely tell that there was nothing like this had happened since Bucker, which was 1970s, early 80s, to have a Cornish music band that was playing for dancing as well, but was also playing, the music in its own right. So that was, very, very exciting. And we played about 1/3 of the traditional Cornish music, and about 1/3 of things people were making up, because there was a lot of music being written by people in the band. And then about 1/3 was actually Breton at that point, because we were very inspired by Breton music, as opposed to Scottish or Irish music, which tended to be the inspiration for the dance bands that I played in previously, where there was not the same approach of improvisation and sort of hypnotic melodies and the kind of things that would go on to become part of Dalla, and so you could tell, you know, even though we were playing very rough and ready at Maisie Day, you know, Simon Lockley would talk very seriously about the pursuit of excellence and the vision that Hilary mentioned. I had never heard anyone talk about a vision of Cornish music moving further, and I've been in Ross Celtic for several years.
What was the vision?
The vision to have Cornish music as a world-class world music, to have it on CD because it was not recorded in any way, and to have it on the concert platform as well as, you know, in kind of small venues, and for everybody to just get out there all this great music that and these great songs that nobody was performing.
I think the other thing was, we, like Francis said, we wanted Cornish people to know about Cornish music, and it was so remarkable. I mean, you know, I know that you're probably going to go on and ask us about this, but the knowledge of our Cornish music was woeful in a way. I mean, they knew Helston Furry, they knew Trelawney, Mel Padstow Mayday song. And that was probably it. And people said there isn't any Cornish music. There is no such thing as Cornish music.
It's all made up.
Yeah. And honestly, you would not believe some of the prejudice that came up. I mean, we used to have. I remember, Francis probably remember me getting a bit irate with a guy because he said to me, "Oh, you're playing Cornish music. That's a bit parochial, isn't it?" You know, and it's we'll talk about lack of vision, like. People, it's okay for people in Ireland to have this amazing culture, but you can't have it. Oh, why not? Why not? You know, and that was our vision. It's quite simple, really. It wasn't rocket science.
Can I just say another thing as well? I think actually it was there was a negative side to this sort of little Celtic music ghetto thing that people were operating in, because people were constantly on the back foot and thinking all our music was rubbish because we were not Irish, we were not Scottish, we were not Breton, and our revival was nothing like theirs. And I think a lot of people found it quite difficult to actually appreciate the stuff that we did have. You know, you would get people who were absolutely passionate about music from elsewhere, folk music from elsewhere, just because they didn't really think Cornwall had anything by comparison. Whereas I'm quite glad in a way, this is also anticipating a little bit, but I'm actually glad that my daughter and her friends grew up not in that environment of going to Celtic things and going, oh, they're really good, you know, and their costumes are great, and they're all professional and they've all been on TV. In fact, they just grew up with a bunch of people who really liked the way they played, and that was what Noslowan gave them, you know. So that's kind of way of looking at it, I think, for me.
Yeah. So, I mean, continuing that, it sounds like the Noslowan movement that you two have been so instrumental in putting together and carrying on since, you know, to today. Can you say a bit more about how that was linked with, for example, Raka coming together at the same time? Was there a relationship between the two because you wanted to get that music out to more people who are Cornish and more people more generally?
That's an interesting question. I think Raka was a development from the Tune Swap Day, which Merv had set up. And I must say that in the tradition of instrumental music of Cornwall, there has been a huge amount of freedom to do what you like. If it's just for playing for the music, there seemed to be an openness and a freedom, which in a way we were lucky because, you know, we were at the beginning of something, a revival. When it came to the dance, there seemed to be these rules that Francis has alluded to already. And unknowingly, almost naively and ignorantly, we kind of fell into, you know very well that there was a lot of resistance to in Noslowan. Raka, going back to Raka, we started that as a tune swap day. It wasn't anything to do with Noslowan to begin with at all. It was just like musicians being able to get together. This was Merv's vision as well, that everybody who played an instrument in Babe Cornish music could have a session together, because it was really difficult up to then. As Francis said, everyone played different keys and they played their arrangements, and it was really difficult to join in. And God, how that was changed. It's fantastic. And that's to do with sessions like the one at Saina's as well, and fantastic that it's also happening at the Bembo. But Noslowen did come from the music, in that the musicians wanted to take it further, that we wanted that the music, being inspired by the Breton Fest Nos, there were these musicians playing really shit hot music, doing some really good arrangements, and people were dancing, and there was this great atmosphere. It was like seamless. It went on. The people were improvising. There wasn't, you didn't have to stop and start like you do at a barn dance or ceilidh or whatever. And so we just thought that was really, really exciting, and we just wanted to do it. And like I say, we did think it was a really good way of being very inclusive, because you didn't have to know the dances, you didn't have to have a partner, you could just join on the end of a line, those sorts of things. It was all part of that sort of mix that was coming out of our Jack and Jenny band, and moving into our next band, which was Sowena. I'm going to show you. Here we are. This is the. That was our first CD as a printed tape.
Who was in Sowena?
So by then, it was Alan Pengelly, Simon Lockley, myself, and Francis. Is that right, Francis?
Yeah.
I was thinking by then, Robin and Joe.
4 of us.
Yeah. So it was 4 of us. That's right. And it was in Sowena that this idea began to develop of Noslowen.
I remember that we used to meet. We had this sort of two things going on, as I said before. We were the musicians for Karen Brown's dance group, and actually we loved doing that. I know it involved, we were all having to learn lots of things, but there was this very strong anchor of Alan and Simon could have done that on their own anyway, and it really, because they were doing that before. So we would meet to practice in St Agnes School, in the little school hall, because Simon was the caretaker there. So we would meet in the school hall and we would play music for the dancers, but we kept wanting to devise things of our own as well. So the musicians would go off into the little library or outside, and we would practice, and then we would pile into the dancers and play to them. And sometimes people just got so excited by things they were playing, ways they were playing the tunes, emphases they were putting on melodies, and thinking about playing hornpipes like hornpipes and a little bit of that, and then we would go back in and play for the dancers. And I can remember Karen going, yes, we can dance this, come on girls, yes, and slight sort of, I can picture sort of Alan like, what, because Alan is an excellent dancer, and he was like, but is this can they dance to this, and then we would go and practice a bit more, and we'd come in and we'd play some other thing. And what I loved about it was that it was like a party. People played and people danced spontaneously. You did not need to be in costume, to be standing next to this person, to be doing the other. If your musicians were playing, they inspired you to dance. And we danced as well. I mean, I didn't dance at all, but when I wrote Olangerio and people started dancing in 5, I thought, well, I think it would be quite nice if I learned how to do this. And I remember one of Karen's dancers kind of guided me around, showing me the footwork, these young people, and they were incredibly appreciative of us, because what Karen had observed was the dreadful divide between musicians and dancers that can go on. And she absolutely worked tirelessly it was also like a parent-child thing, because her children were dancing with her, and these girls would come up and thank us for playing for them. And when we went out and played for them, they were absolutely stunning with these costumes Karen had done. And I kind of connect in my mind very much the beginning of Noslowen with all of that, with like, you've got young people, you've got people in one place. Karen had a group where in that stage of the revival, it was actually very rare to have a Cornish dance group in one village. People drove all over Cornwall to go to these groups. There was only 1 or 2, and is that sort of like typical stage of a revival at first, where it's like the what do you call it, the people who are real fans, and they'll travel and they'll gather, whether it's in all over Cornwall, and they all know each other and they all learn Cornish, and they all sort of 30 or 40 of them kind of thing, and then all go to these different things. And Karen started the village group. She knew from her children at the local school, and they started doing all this dancing. And of course we were traveling, you know, a little way to get to St Agnes, but I think that was a really important thing. I don't know if the Belingi Troll Band was around then. They might have been.
I think they were, yeah.
Yeah. So that was really special, because that's what I think that's one of the things about Festnoz that Alan Stivell wrote this list of the qualities you need, things you need for Festnoz, which is, you know, similar to what we needed for Noslowen, and one of them is something like a village community, and you know, it being quite cheap to go along and join in, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I can kind of, because the by this time as well, we should mention that Neil had obviously come to Cornwall, had he not?
So it was about 98, and
98.
He came down and joined Sowena for a few of our gigs, and it was quite exciting to have Neil come down, because he'd obviously been playing Irish and Scottish band. He had managed, Anam was the band he was touring with, and he toured all around the world, and he always took Cornish music into that band. So they've got a recording of St Kevin standing up alongside the Irish polkas, and the people in the band were very accepting of this tradition, and were very interested. And I think that helped us realize that this music was just as good. It's just, you've got to be able to play it properly. You know, we give it its chance, practice, and get better. It's important to be really inclusive and to allow everybody to join in, and that's where session is so fantastic. But equally, this music can be taken to a much higher level, and let's go there, let's just take it, you know. And that's kind of what I feel that's what Neil was bringing when he joined us.
And was that important for you in terms of how you saw yourself in those bands, having that passion and drive to make sure Cornish music is enjoyable in an inclusive way? How did that relate to that moment that Neil Davey arrives? And
I don't think it's an easy thing, because as soon as you want to start developing and get better, you know, it naturally, people who aren't there with you are going to feel left out. And I myself have that experience, and I think many people have that experience in music. I wish it wasn't like that, but sometimes it feels like a ladder. There's some people are above you and you're to aspire to, and other people are below you, and you know, you tread on them, and that's not nice. I don't like it. But you know, and I've always felt that the session model was fantastic, because it's about a circle and that we're all equals, and there's very few other music genres where that can happen. And even though Neil did bring that professional quality, he was also very open and accepting of beginners and people joining in. And he, like myself, have always loved to push the music out. You know, not just I'm the best and I'm going to keep it all to myself. It was never like that. The idea was, I think for me, we then moved into Dalla, as you know. For me, Dalla, we always saw Dalla as a bit of an ambassador for Cornwall, to show the excellence if we could. That doesn't mean we thought nobody else could. In fact, Neil keeps going on at me, going, oh, when are all those other amazing bands going to happen? I mean, that sounds probably a bit condescending, but you know, that excellence, you know, doing a proper recording, and I mean, you know, where you really work hard and you spend 3 weeks in a studio, which costs a lot of money, but you're prepared to spend that money because you want that music to be excellent, and that can stand up alongside other recordings. And you know, there aren't many people doing that even now.
It's that inclusiveness, and then Dalla being, you know, the incredible ambassadors and inspiration actually for so many people, you know, myself included. Francis, is this why Bagas came about? How did Bagas come about through all this?
Right, it was very much connected actually, because as I said before, you know, the excitement of Noslowen and Sowena and all this happening around about the year 2000. The other thing that was happening around about then was that I took some time out, because I had my daughter Kathy at that point, and this was like, there was all these other things going on in life that I would not have I would have happily given up my teaching job, but giving up, you know, not being able to play in the band was just a horrifying thought. But anyway, I had some time out, and we invited Jen Dyer to play instead of me, because Sowena had quite a lot of gigs in the calendar. And it was quite astonishing that that was a catalyst of a time, because I had a bit of time out, and then I came back to Sowena, which had changed beyond all recognition. It was astonishing. It could have been my something to do with my perception, but I think it was a fact. I mean, that there was Neil there playing absolutely dazzlingly, and everybody else, and the repertoire, the set list that I had been playing before I had Kathy, and the one that was being played afterwards was completely different for a start. So there were all these rehearsals, getting to know the new stuff, and I had a very strong feeling that there was something else that I would be doing, and it wouldn't be this. So when Dalla started, it was very interesting, because some people were quite upset on my behalf that I wasn't invited to be in Dalla, and that the Dalla, as Hilary was saying, there is this sort of selection of who's going to be in a certain group to do a certain mission, which they did. I was just their biggest fan immediately, and absolutely loved the fact that their way of working and their kind of standard of working was channeled into the right places with the right people. But I was quite nervous, because there was a meeting to discuss these matters, and you know how these things can be. And before I went to the meeting, I thought, right, I'm going to try and research this fiddle thing I want to do, and I'm also going to do more singing. So I joined Kescana with Joe Tagney. So we had our meeting where we decided that Sowena would fold, and Dalla would set forth on their journey. And I just, for the next several months, I just kept making notes and talking to people about starting Bagas, because I had been really interested in like multiple fiddle groups and the sound of multiple fiddles, whether they were Breton or Scottish or whatever, for a while. And also, remember Graham Ellaby, Hilary? There was a guy who wanted to set up a fiddle group, and he didn't in the end do it, but we used to chat about, he taught and repaired fiddles, lived in Saltash at the time, and he was very inspirational in terms of someone just getting up and doing something and gathering the skills along the way. So anyway, I had in the back of my mind, yeah, he was going to call it the Kerno Fiddle Team, the KFT. Yeah, KFT. And I loved this idea, and me and Graham had plans, but then, you know, I don't know what happened. I think he moved away, or something happened. So I spent a few months researching, and just, I wanted people that I taught, because I was teaching a few fiddle lessons, not a lot actually, but I was aware that my students were not playing in between lessons very much, and they didn't have an outlet, and they weren't going to bump into Cornish folk music during the week. As Hilary was saying, you know, there weren't so many opportunities, there weren't so many sessions, that the music wasn't, you know, people weren't listening to their CDs because they you know, there weren't any. No, there must have been one or two by then. Oh no, when did you record Richard Vane? 2001, I think. Yeah, so you would have been just doing that just before I started Bagas. So I suppose I would have probably just rung up half a dozen people and said that I was starting this fiddle group, and or emailed them probably. And so it started in 2001. Yeah, 2001, in my front room with 6 people. And I didn't know, all I wanted was to get people together to have a bit of a jam on the tunes that we were maybe working on in their lessons. So so we had a small repertoire of tunes, and people liked the idea of what I was doing. So people would kind of drop in, you know, Neil, for example, and people would drop in who already played really, really well, which was fantastic, because I wasn't actually sure about leading music then. I hadn't really done much. Myself and Hilary, parallel to all this, were running a workshop business called Hubbardillia, meaning lots of noise in Cornish, and that was where I really learned how to teach music, because I didn't really know all that much about teaching music before then. And
that was for children. We were going into schools. It wasn't with adults, which is a different thing.
That was how things started. And I think by then Graham Ellaby, who I mentioned earlier on, had moved, and some of his students came to me instead, like Frank Pickering, a few people who were went on to, you know, form bands and do important things. And I didn't plan that we would do gigs. I didn't know what we would be doing, but it became, and it wasn't for ages that we played Noslow and style, you know, settings really. That just it was completely organic. It didn't really have me saying I want us to do this and I'm going to recruit like this. It just kind of expanded until I needed to venue, because I had 13 people. I didn't have enough chairs. I chose Saturday mornings at 9:30 because that was the time when it was only monthly at that point. I was doing some tutoring from home, and Saturday morning was my time without the small baby, because her dad would take her off to visit grandparents. So that was Saturday morning was the time when I would do, you know, teach an A-level French class or a GCSE Spanish class or whatever to students at home. So I thought, well, that's the ideal time. I'll do it then. I didn't research or think about whether anyone would get up to come to Truro at 9:30 on a Saturday morning. So that's how it started. And yeah, and like the whole Burley family, and I mean, just yeah, lovely, like loads of people. But you know, 8 people, 10 people, 13 people. And then because one thing that was very, very useful actually was that because I'm a church member at 3 Milestone, just up the road, I was allowed to have a small room for free of charge, just for a donation. And so that was, I think, fantastic, because a lot of groups have problems with venues, don't they? And you know, how much you pay and all the rest of it. So at that point we were quite small, and we could never have afforded a proper rental of a premises. So we then had to move into the larger hall because the small room we were in was too small, and they have a coffee morning at the same time. So it was just that was sort of setting the stage really, because in the background of this, Bagas Crowd was always separate from my work. I mean, now it's it's the main thing that I do really, but in those days it was a bit of fun once a month, getting together with these people, having a lovely, you know, time playing the music, possibly having a little gig out somewhere, you know. But in the background of that, myself and Hilary were working pretty hard at this point, getting together and doing projects, and playing in the band together, but doing projects as well. At one point, there were so many things we were doing that you know, it was hard to keep track of what to spend the time doing each time we met. But we started out, as I said, our business was doing workshops in schools. So that brought together me with the teaching background, Hilary with the theatre and drama therapy background as well. So that all sort of came together. Then we kept being asked to do other things like run events. And then we started being interested in doing Nosloans. Dalla were doing Nosloans once a month in Porthtown Village Hall. So Hilary was performing there. So Bagas would get asked to, you know, perhaps do a little support, which is one of the first gigs we ever did, was to support Dalla and play, you know, a few tunes for dancing kind of beforehand. So everything started to all fit into this, all the things we've been talking about so far really, because the professional level with Dalla, and then the community level with Bagas. And when we had been putting on these monthly Nosloas for a while, somebody said, let's have 12th night with 12 bands. And then, you know, you've got the whole, what was happening with our work was quite, by the time it got to like 2002-3, if that's all right to talk about at this point, was that our little business kind of expanded. We did a project with Will Coleman, for which he had got funding, called Kick Up Your Heels, and that involved Nosloan getting quite big then for that year, wasn't it, Hilary? We did these various different, there was Carnglaze caverns full of people dancing, and
at Eden, the Eden project as well, that was really good, wasn't it? The huge serpent, a forbidden fruit festival we called it.
How were people finding out about you, and whether it's the business or the bands you were in? Were they approaching you, or were you approaching different venues and people?
We had a build up, you know, people knew of us from being Lorient, and then Jack and Jenny Band, and then Sowena, and then Dalla. So we had sort of a legacy of people that we could call on, and, you know, the network. But I think, you know, the thing is, again, about being professional was that we didn't do anything else. This was our work, our life. So we would be working, you know, 80% of the time was admin, you know. So we were promoting ourselves, you know, trying to get gigs, writing articles for papers, you know, finding out all the what's on magazines that you could think of, seeing if we could get articles, you know, advertising. We were constantly, if we weren't playing, we were promoting, you know. It was just exhausting. I just remember it being just this never-ending list of things. And like Frances said, I mean, having a baby or children and juggling that at the same time. And when you're self-employed, as most people know, there's not very much division between your own life and your work. And I mean, I remember me and Neil sitting in bed just talking about Cornish music, and I'm going, please, I just want to go to sleep. You know? I mean, I think the cap and pemp was invented in our bedroom, actually.
You heard it here first.
Some people might say otherwise, but I certainly remember doing the chorelas, and you know, in our bedroom, trying out the 5-step. That's for sure.
I never heard that before.
I'll ask Neil, maybe he will remember.
I'm wondering whether you could now talk a bit about some of the tunes you've both composed for the tradition, how these came about, and maybe if I was to push you, which would be your favourites?
Well, I mean, I suppose it started to write tunes with Lorient, I think. Yeah. Certainly, I think one of the first song I wrote, it was songs, and I wrote Turning of the Tide, which is a song about being homesick for Cornwall, and I was living away in Bristol at the time. And my brother put the traditional tune to it. So, and then adapted it quite a lot. So you might not even realise that as I walked out one evening, one of those, one evening so clear, that's it. Anyway, yeah, so in terms of writing, I think to begin with, it was just a response to something for me. It was just, if I felt emotionally, I had an emotional response and I want to express it through music, that's what happened. And later on, when we began to, and this was really at the beginning, when Neil came home, I think we began to really think about the canon of music a lot and think about how it all fitted to, like, what we had: hornpipes, we had polkas, we had reels, not very many, we had four processionals, and we began to actually group them, categorize them. And I think when that happened, then I think that gave us some inspiration to write in the idiom a lot more. So write within a particular, like, oh, I really want to write a hornpipe, or so. I think one of my songs, which is I can't remember which one it is, Mos Mays, which means going out, I wrote as a response to St. Kevin very much. It was a harmony that I'd started to play and quite liked it and thought, oh, that feels like a tune. And Neil had said to me, well, his tune, Willy Monkey, had been a response to St. Kevin, I think so. So he sort of turned it upside down, and it came out as Willy Monkey, which was a popular tune that lots of people were playing. Anyway, so I think that kind of was a springboard for me to write later on. I think if you pushed me, I'm not really sure, it's hard to say. There's two. One of my tunes that I do like is a 5/4 called Anken. And the reason I like it is that, again, it's an emotional response. And I had read Sebastian Falk's third song, and he had talked about how the Cornish miners had been in the trenches and they had been asked to tunnel underground. And it's the first time I'd ever heard of anything like that. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, the trenches themselves were bad enough, but the fact that they were at war in tunnels, I just felt so distressed. And I remember Neil coming to bed once, not just in bits, I was like floods of tears, and I felt I needed to have a response to that. And I wrote Anken, which means sorrow, and it's got, what I like about that tune is that it's kind of got an anger in it as well as sadness, which is how I felt. It's kind of like means a lot to me. Yeah.
And with the many others you wrote, and you were talking about category, you know, the beginning of sort of categories of hornpipes and polkas and processionals. Did you feel as a musician and composer you wanted to make sure you did one that, let me try this as a polka, or let me try this as a hornpipe, or did the rhythm side of what your emotional response was come more naturally than that?
I think what happened was that I was quite an intuitive musician. I don't tend to read music with my clarinet, although I can read music. Because of the transposing issue, I just became much more and so I kind of respond to music. But interestingly, I was writing tunes around the sort of 98 time. They could have irregular bars and I wouldn't even realise, you know. And Neil was really hot on rhythm. He's really, and I think it's really interesting, because I think traditional music is based very much on rhythm, and we're taught, especially if we're taught to read music, we tend to, a lot of people, me included, we can read the melody, but people trip up on a rhythm quite a lot, and I think rhythm's very subtle, and I think what makes traditional music work is the rhythm. You can almost throw away the tune, get that rhythm right, and you can vary the tune, that's not a problem, but the rhythm has to have this driving feel. And so I think he helped me think about the categories and time signatures and bars and helped me shape, I think, what I then went on to develop. I think Nos Lowen has also really helped us think about that as well, that Headley needs a hornpipe, you know, Rosvian is a polka. What is the difference? And me and Neil, I mean, honestly, it's been hours in the kitchen, like going, well, this could be a mazurka, but then it could also be, what's a waltz? And is it a Viennese waltz? And that's too fast for a jouster 3. And how do, you know, so there's a hell of a lot of that going on even now.
How about you, Frances? What about some of the tunes you've composed, and how did they come about?
Well, I haven't written very many tunes. And somebody told me once that when I die, there'll be this tombstone saying, "Here lies Frances Bennett. She wrote Olengario," because there isn't anything else.
I do need to just say about Olengario. We had this tune, Corella, and there were a couple of others, maybe Three Nights and To Mirth Incline, that we'd adapted to make 5/4. But Olengario was like the first 5/4 tune that really worked as a proper 5/4. Not only that, it's just a brilliant construction, even if Frances didn't mean it to be. It worked. It's got a brilliant way. I mean, teaching 5/4, I always think Olengario is a really, really #1 example of how to play 5/4, and it's got such a good pattern and a repetitive rhythm. It's a really good way of getting into it. So yes, I think it should be on your tombstone.
Great. I'm very pleased to hear that it is so perfect for and for playing on clarinets as well, playing on different instruments.
What was the background to Olengario?
I was going to Cornish classes, and I don't know whether it's a fanciful notion or not, but the idea that about music, the sound of particular music from places connecting with the sound of the language. So I think I'd been to an Irish music workshop where we learnt a slow air, and the teacher said, if you know Gaelic, it's better because you're going to play it as the words of the song. You know, if you knew the words of the song, it would help you, particularly if you knew it in Gaelic, because this is how, you know, the fiddle is, the ornaments are reflecting the language, and it was a very sort of romanticized kind of thing rather than a linguistic or musical one. But I started thinking, well, if there are Irish songs around which just supposing, you know, you've got that tune but you haven't got the language anymore, what about the other way around? As we've got some revived Cornish, why don't we use that as a way of writing music? And I was also quite keen on the idea that I learned Cornish and as recommended by Hilary. At one point, all the people in the band at the time, in the Jack and Jenny band, were involved, well, most of us, in learning Cornish, in learning late Cornish. And I still think it's a more musical sound than Cemin, or the standard written form. So that was all sort of in my mind, that I wanted to use Olangerio and Bays, which is all the words in the world. I think it was Olangerio and Bays originally, all the words that are in the world. And I used that sentence because in the Cornish class, our teacher was asking everybody different questions around the room, and he got as far as me and just got stuck and looked at me and said, "Oh, my Olangerio and Bays, Nylama Paderi Tabn Fydd, there's all the words in the world, and I can't think of a single one." And there was a sort of laugh, you know, and I thought, "What did you say? I didn't understand." You know, so can you tell me what that phrase was? And I wrote it down. I thought, "That's really nice, Olangerio and Bays, I like that," or in Bays. So I sort of used it as a pattern, you know, so that you could kind of sing to it, and that's how the tune came about.
Amazing. We've talked about inclusivity before. What has been your experience of men and women on the Cornish trad scene, both as in terms of how Cornish music is presented, and also your own personal experiences of being women on the scene?
I actually think because the Cornish music scene wasn't big, I think it gave us a huge freedom. I mentioned that before, and I don't recall feeling inferior to the men on the scene at all. I felt there was an inclusivity for all of us, and maybe I'm wrong. I do know that in other spheres, another musical world, that doesn't feel like that at all. I did a jazz degree, 1 year of a jazz degree, and it was so misogynistic, you would not believe it. It was such a shock. I was just floored by that. And I think this sort of drive, you know, I don't know. I mean, I have had feelings where I felt, oh, it's okay for men because they can go off, whereas we've got to look after the babies. You know, it's not exactly like that. And I think certainly mine and Francis's partners were very willing to be equal and help us. But Neil told me that, you know, in the sessions, when he first started playing sessions in Brighton and then Edinburgh, it was all men. It was very rare women, and the women always sang. You know, if they were going to do anything, they were going to sing. You know, I think that you used to feel like that even with mainstream music. I was going, where's the women? Where are the women playing the guitars? Where's the women? You know, where's women clarinet players? That's what I want to know. You know? I mean, of course there are, and it's getting better all the time. But I think music on the whole, there's something about music. It's very to learn an instrument, you really have to be, you know, quite single-minded and be prepared to put the hours in, you know, of practice. And I think it's really, if you're trying to run a family and a home, it's really, really hard. You know, and some people are able to do that. Yeah, and I think there is. It's the same with all work in a way. You know, women have always been on the back foot because we have babies. It's like almost like we have to somehow as a society, find a way around all that, don't we? We haven't really.
Actually, but you bring up an interesting point, and I'd be interested to know, Francis, whether you agree that by contrast to, say, other musical genre and musical experiences, the Cornish trad music scene feels a bit more inclusive and a bit less dominated by gender splits. Possibly there may be some kind of everyday issues, or maybe there are more age-related divisions. But what's your thoughts on gender differences?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about this, and like similarly to Hilary, I personally have not felt any prejudice. However, I think there's a thing going on, and I made a little spidergram, so I'm going to tell you about the thing. I think in Cornish, a lot of Cornish cultural activity now, there's a bit of an idealisation going on about the young Cornish working class man. And if you think about it, the young Cornish working class man, go back 100 and whatever years, they would have been in the brass bands in chapel, in the male voice choirs. They would have been dancing, drinking, going to festivals, and they would have done all those things. And they would have been working in the fishing and the mining, and they would have been cousin Jacks, and they would have done all the farming. And then suddenly, all those industries collapse. You have immigration, you have wars. So by the time the revival comes along, we're in this landscape that's like a weird monument to this young Cornish working class man, because it's like created by them, isn't it? All that, like if you look out of your window, I mean practically everything, but they are not here. The Cornish language is revised mainly by posh people, so that doesn't connect with the Cornish young working class man. And then when you have us, along we come, a lot of us women, and get people involved in, well, what should we do? Well, we'll have, we'll revive dance groups. And dance groups now, what do but say, we have no young people, we have no men. And because I think there is this idealization of this lost person, the Cornish working class man, who was like really on top of all these areas that I've mentioned. And I don't know if you've caught up with Alan Kent's book. If Noslowan is criticised for not taking off as a movement because there's not many youth, there's not the youth involved, there's not the fusion of other musics involved, which youth might do, there are not men involved, instead there are, too many women involved, that's exactly why, because the people who are doing things now, as well as, as Hilary said, the biological side of things, most people who go out and do stuff in communities are actually women. Churches are run by aged women. If you look at all those different organizations I mentioned earlier, a lot of them have either disappeared, or they're run by very old people, or they're run by women. So I think the time has come to celebrate the fact that the women are doing the stuff. And I had a Bagas meeting recently. I mean, we never have politics in Bagas, but we had a meeting recently where two guys, we have an AGM very informally every year, two people in the group, their daughters had just gone to uni, and in the group that morning there were no young people at all. There were only people, adult people, and there was a discussion on whether we should recruit, how we should do it, should we have a website, etc., etc. And I just felt like, no, I can't do that again. No, that's not my thing. I don't want to do any of those things. The following week, when we had our Bagas practice, two people came in who played the cello. They were not children, and they were not, they weren't young people. And I just thought, well, I rest my case. I'm going to teach anyone who comes through the door. And Hilary has a mantra, which is attraction, not promotion. And I really believe in that, because I think we shouldn't be running around trying to attract the elusive young Cornish working class man or young people. Someone else can do that. Someone that if we have, in Bagas, we have one young girl of 12 who is actually becoming quite a good player. Well, she doesn't mind that we're not in her age group. And, it's interesting that it's a girl as well. And, she'll probably go on and lead things. So that was kind of my sort of reflection, because I have had a couple of people who let's say who they are. So Neil Kennedy and Alan Kent were both quite supportive of Noslowan, knew a lot about it at the beginning, loved it, wrote about it. And Neil, through his Cornish language project with Late Cornish, he was trying to get young Cornish, the young Cornish working class man learning the simple part of the version of the language with Late Cornish, and actually making a contribution to the, the culture. And Alan Kent, well, both of them didn't quite trust folk music. It's sort of a bit of a strange thing, really, but they kind of liked what we were doing with it, and they're both quite disappointed by how it has turned out now in Noslowan, which at first I was just very offended by this, and then I started thinking about it more, apart from not agreeing, and I just thought, I think this is what's happening, really. I'm sure I've heard Will Coleman say something very similar to this, Hilary, about if you want to get involved in Cornish culture where Cornish people are doing things, you could go bowling, but Will was saying, I don't want to go bowling, I want to play music, so that's my take on it, really. And good for all those women of our age. If we get together to do stuff, it's going to be people of our age. We get older, the people who are mainly involved in the thing get older, and that's fine, really. That's my look at it, anyway.
I really can really understand what Francis is saying about this idealized working class man that we all kind of aspire to, like, in our shouts. you know, which is singing in the pub, it's predominantly men. Why is it predominantly men? It's not that men are better than women. That's rubbish, isn't it? It's predominantly men because men were allowed to go to pubs, women were not. Women actually stayed at home and cooked the bloody Sunday dinner, didn't they, while the men had a drink or whatever. And, you know, it's not, and so the tradition is faulty in that way. Actually, some of these songs that the men were singing in the pub were songs that were sung in the church, like some of the hymns. And in those hymns, all of them were four parts. Women were involved in that. And I just think it's really important that we don't lose sight of that. So when we did our pub singing book, we had men saying to us things like, oh, we don't have women, we don't want all that screeching. That's a really interesting interpretation, isn't it, of a woman's voice. You know, actually, we don't have bass. We are not bass singers. And, I just think I'm really glad that my Red River Singers are a mixed choir. And the men involved, I really get the idea that you can get such a different quality with the range of voices rather than it just being just men. But, you know, I even now when I'm in the pub, I'm going, oh my God, am I doing this right? Because are there enough men? Are there too many women? Are we being too screechy? And I'm going, oh, wait a minute, this is our shout. We organised it. We put it on. It can be anything we want it to be. And yet I do have that kind of, you know, there in the back of my mind, what the perfect thing should be, and it should have men in it.
What would be your respective messages specifically to women and girls interested in getting involved with Cornish traditional music?
I would just say, you know, I would say the same to any person, whether it's female or male, but it's usually women who lack confidence more than men. And it just is, you know, they just doubt themselves so much more. I would, you know, just say you just got to believe in yourself. You just got to believe in what you're doing and try and do it in the kindest possible way without hurting other people. And try and be the best you can. You know, that thing of when you stand in the sunshine, someone else falls in your shadow. Some of us are in that kind of mentality, but actually it's up to that other person to step out of your shadow. You know, we've all got our own, there's enough sun for everybody. And I think, you know, that's for me, it's about confidence.
I was thinking the same as Hilary, that confidence is just such a huge thing, and both of us in all the different things we've talked about, you know, we've talked about learning and about not knowing things and about finding things out for ourselves. And it would have been really interesting when we were starting out if there had been a Dalla that we would have learned from, or a Black Eyed Nancy, or you know, that there had been a couple of, you know, just a few Cornish female, like active, you know, kind of role models. So yeah, so I really love that analogy with the sun, and that's good. Yeah, not to worry. I think about that is a really good, you know, message. It's not to worry about those things that we've been talking about that might be in our heads.
I think also, I just think that women today are in a much better position, not just culturally, you know, across the board in society, but within our own Cornish music. I just think our Cornish music is in a lot more healthy, exciting place for people to take stuff on. I think that I would not wish on them some of the criticisms and crap that Frances and I have actually had from just wanting to have, because of this, the vision that we had didn't tally with other people's visions, and the you know, it's actually been quite abusive at times. And I just really hope that women of today can just rise above any of that rubbish and do what they want to do, really.